Okay, so that is the end of RC4 discussions. I'll put a link to some slides. I just went through those. To enjoy those slides, so slides with more biases on the home page. You really should download and look at in a PDF viewer, not in your browser. So what you see there is going to be plots of how often each of the key bytes, each of the stream bytes he calls it ZI, I call it RI. So you have a plot for everything. So for instance, for the second one, you do see that the 0, 1 is much more likely, and then the other ones are smaller. But you also see over many, many distributions like that they're not equally high. There's some little bits. And then for all of those, so then you really see how the biases change as you increase this I. And if Ron says, okay, discard the first 256 positions, then you hope that after 256 all the biases are gone. And what the slides show, no, they're not. There were a bunch of questions about the homeworks, and I do realize that I so far have spoken purely about an area which is called secret key cryptography. And we continue with this still for the next week. So A and B share a key. And then this key, so far you've seen in detail some stream ciphers or LFSRs leading to stream ciphers. That then encrypts your plaintext to a ciphertext. And if you want to decrypt, well, you use the same key and decrypt. So this key to encrypt and decrypt. So there's another name for secret key crypto. That's also called symmetric cryptography. Because the key is used in a symmetric way between encryption and decryption. There's another thing which is more recent, but still a long time ago for your scale, namely from the 70s. And I mean, we have passed the 70s. Like, most of the LFSR stuff is past the 70s. RC4 is later than the 70s. But at that moment, in the 70s, crypto was just making its first public appearance. So until then, it was basically a thing for the agencies or like newspaper hobbyists, no real science for the public. But then, late 70s, 1976, Diffie and Hellman asked the question or proposed something called now public key cryptography. Or in analogy with this one, asymmetric crypto. In which you have different functions for encryption and decryption. not just different functions, but even different keys. Now, the reason I'm talking about this now is that when you're sending your homeworks in a week from now, Thursday before the exercise class, we asked you to encrypt those. From all the crypto we've done so far, that would mean that Gustavo and I have to give you a little sheet of paper saying, okay, this is the key how you communicate to me. And since we don't want to expose your communication to her, we should give each of you or each group of you a separate key. Well, we haven't done that yet. And the nice thing is it's not necessary because of this idea of, well, not because of the idea, but also because the idea has an instantiation. So what Diffie Hellman thought about and gave some example of, we will see many examples in the second part of this course, everything after next week, well, even next Thursday already. And you will use that, well, you don't need to understand the details to use it for PGP. So there is a public key, which is used to encrypt a message to say me, i.e. Tanja, you use the key which is called a public key. And then you use some function. So let's call Tanja's public key big K. So then we have that the ciphertext is the encryption under big key, in a K, key, big K, of some message. The name of the public key implies that this can be made public, and actually my key is public. Now if you send me this little C, then I need to know something that nobody else does, because else we don't have crypto there. So then Tanja uses a private key which is different, it's a little k, to decrypt. So the way it works, assume everything's fine, I'm taking the decryption under small k of the ciphertext, and I should be getting the message back. Now this is only good if nobody can compute little k from big K. So this is secure as long as nobody can compute capital K from lowercase k. Or, that would be bad, right? Yes, thank you. Gosh. Okay. And of course, we also want that the function, the encryption function is reasonable. So also nobody should be able to recover M from C. Or M from C. The second part, well, that we know already in our symmetric crypto systems using RC4. Well, okay, you have some good guesses, but you shouldn't be able to just recover the message, else we consider the system broken. But now we have an additional requirements that something like this holds. Now, there are a bunch of candidates for this, but we will get somewhat more into mathematics. I don't know how many of you have heard about complexity theory. So you have functions which are very hard to compute. And then we have some functions for which it's easy to state the correct result. Like, if you have managed to compute them, then verifying that you computed correctly is easy. Now, this will be like a description of NP-hard problems with witnesses and so on. To give you an example, which is actually what we're going to use later on, it is very easy to multiply two numbers, but it takes more effort to factor a number into its prime factors. But if I give you the prime factors, you can very easily check that I did this correct. So there is an asymmetry in the hardness of these two operations. Multiplication is more complicated than factoring. There are some very general audience explanations which then go like, hey, if you take two different colors of paint and you mix them, that's easy to do. If you get one color and you try to figure out what went in here, then that's, well, you can't separate them. Of course, you can run it through a spectrum analyzer, but you are not able to unmix them. So don't take them as the, oh, you don't know how much green and yellow went in there. Just getting the green and the yellow back, that should be complicated. So you have a separation to mixing is easy, and then taking the mix and getting it back is hard. Or if you make cookie dough, you won't get the egg back. But it's easy to make cookie dough. Somebody gives you egg and milk and whatever, maybe don't, whatever. If you want to make cookie dough, look up a recipe on the internet, don't ask me. But if you have cookie dough, you will not get the ingredients back. I can promise you that. If you break an egg, you will not get the egg back afterwards. So here we have a function which in one direction is relatively easy, and in the other direction should be hard. Now, so far so nice, we've now encrypted our stuff, but that doesn't tell us any way that we would be possibly be able to decrypt. So what we actually want to have is some function which for everybody is hard to invert, except for the person who has a secret key. So the person who has a secret key has some extra knowledge. And so that's when you're getting function analogs being a little tricky. So best I know is like if you have a turnstile in a shopping mall, you enter the store, everybody can go forward. If you're trying to go backwards, you can't. Except for the guy who has the key to unlock this thing, take it off, and then of course you can go backwards. So this key would be then the physical analog of the private key. You know what a turnstile is? Like when you go in your shop, there's like this turning like, okay, now you have mostly doors that open. Bad old days, you had a physical thing which was going forward, and you go tick, 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 each thing. There's a little hook, and then it goes hook again. And so when you're trying to go backwards, it hits here, but forward is easy. So there's a flap which you have to run by, and then if you're trying to go backwards, it doesn't work. So this way, good. This way, doesn't work. And then if you want to get out, you can of course lift up the top and then find it. Why am I talking about this here? What we're expecting you to do is, without much understanding, just find the software for your homework submission. You need a key. Well, two keys actually. Of course, you also need to solve the homeworks. All right, not to talk about this yet. So, but you need to generate a PGP key pair. PGP is something to look up. I have some links on the homepage. Then you need to get Gustavo's and my public keys. Get the public keys. Of Gustavo and Tanja. You Again, that's already set on my homepage, including like where to find those. Then you need to use PGP to encrypt your homework. And you should just encrypt it to both of us because it's up to us to decide who corrects you, not to you. Now, you probably wanted to figure out what grade you got. And we also insist on being able to communicate to you. So, send the encrypted homework and your public key. Do not send me your private key. It has happened. It happens normally, but we don't want your private keys. I mean, it's fun, but no, this one of the learning things of this course is that you should understand how public key crypto works, and the important part is the private key is private to you. Yeah? That's something you keep with you. Don't send it along. Only send the public key. Okay, now at this point, you satisfy the requirements. You might also want to CC the people in your team. Like we have now, so it's a break, teamed up everybody with somebody else. It's not mandatory, but if you CC somebody, it's kind of boring for them if they receive a message which is encrypted to Gustavo and me. I mean, it's good for them to know that you submit your homework, but they might actually want to be able to decrypt it. So you should also encrypt to them. And if, well, we normally reply to all, so we should also have their keys. And also include their public keys. Okay, who here has used PGP before? Okay, those who have not, no, keep your arms open, keep your arms up. Those who have not, look at those arms. Those are the first people to ask for help. Because I usually offer that you can send me dummy messages, and I will again offer that you send me dummy messages. But if I'm getting 84 dummy messages like, hey, I just want to check whether my key works, it takes me a little while to go through those. You'll get better service with all these other people. These are much nicer people than me. They will have far less nasty comments if you send them your private key. Well, actually not so sure about this. Don't send anybody your private key. But I recommend that you try PGP before next Thursday. It is not the most user-friendly. You find on the internet lots of people complaining about PGP, but it's this thing that we have. So, encouragement to all of you, once you pass this course, and you know enough crypto, well, stay on for the master's courses, but we want people to make something better than PGP. PGP is not nice. I wish that in 2 years' time when I'm teaching this course again, I could say, hey, there is this other thing. We don't have to use PGP anymore. It's totally usable. Let's use that. Now, there are some possibilities, but at this moment, the only thing that pretty much anybody can use and anybody has is PGP. So we're using PGP. Good. So try this with a friendly person. Or me. Now we're getting to usability and not to crypto. So how to find? Okay. So until now everything was the clean world of crypto. No nasty use, no problems. If you want to get my public key, you come to me, you get my public key. Well, I said before, the great thing about this is that I don't have to give a public key to everybody, or at least I don't have to give a different key to everybody. Everybody can use the same public key that I have published. Then PGP assumes that, well, probably you haven't met, but maybe you know somebody else. So there's a whole kind of recommender system, or I vouch for somebody else's key. So lots of stuff you find on the internet about usability of PGP is about how do you know that the key is the right key. One way is you go to my homepage, it has HTTPS, on my homepage is a key, you can use that key. Or, well, Gustav is in my homepage. So homepage of the recipient. Alternatively is when you have installed a system which is using PGP, it usually also has a function to search. And then it searches something which is called the key service. Also, I'm perfectly fine if you have your key on the key server and you just tell me it's on the key server, here's a fingerprint. Now, how do I recognize what is your key? I will usually search by email address or by name. Typically by email address. Now when you search for, say, hypertopic.org, then you get my key from when I was, I don't know, well, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 3 years ago, 1 year ago. How are you supposed to figure out which is the right key? You will see a bunch of keys which have a very long time ago generation date and have an expiration date. For those you don't want to use. But you will still find my crack key, which I'm using for homework submission, which has something like 1024 in front. So you see 1024, that's the key that you should use. There's also the key for interesting stuff, which has much larger number, which is 4096 bits. Now, which one do I want to use? How do I transport this to you? In order to not tell you, this is my key, I give you a short version of my key. And that thing is called a fingerprint. So it's a way like you don't have the full human in just a thumbprint, but it's still something which is pretty unique among humans. So you can't recover the key from the fingerprint, but if you have two different keys and you want to know which one is the right one, you compute the fingerprint for each of them, and then you check which one matches. So when I look at the key servers, then it tells me a whole bunch of things about expiration times and sizes, and it also tells me a fingerprint. And then, for instance, my business card contains my fingerprint of my PGP key, so somebody who sees this fingerprint on my card and sees it on the key server knows that this is the right key. So, and then you select by expiration and fingerprint. Now the fingerprint is the short string. If it's too short, if it's just a number between 1 and 10, it wouldn't help us much, right? Because if you're trying to figure out like which of my 20 keys is the right one, you would have collisions there, you would have identical values. So it shouldn't be too short, but it's a lot shorter than looking at all 4,000 bits to figure out which one is the right one. If you search more for PGP issues, then one of the issues is that there are two different sizes of fingerprints. There's one which is 32 bytes. Sorry, there's the, how many characters is it? 32 characters? No, it's offhand at all. Well, there is this length and this length. And this length is too short. This length is so short you can actually brute force something. You can find another key which matches the same fingerprint. So there have been some very interesting attacks where people were uploading purported keys for somebody else. Now, I'm not important enough, but for Debian developers who sign with the public keys of PGP, a new release, if you could convince the world to believe there's a new key, it's actually worth something. So there is a whole network of fake keys that match on the very short fingerprints, so everybody's encouraged to use the larger fingerprints. I'm not going to do much about the usability. As far as I know, there's only public keys that really come from me, so if you pick one of those, I should be able to decrypt it. In the worst case, what you're sending to me is your homework. If at some point you have something interesting to send to me, please use the big key, not the small key. This is as much or more than I wanted to say about about PGP, but I actually wanted to say something about this topic of fingerprinting. Now, in crypto, you'll sometimes see something which is called a hash function. And a hash function is a map to a fixed length output and we typically have arbitrary length input. So in formulas we have our function h, which maps from strings 0, 1. Star up here means arbitrary. So any length n maps to some fixed length n. Now if you study computer science, you have seen hash functions as a means to do like where to store elements like tables. For that one, you would like that overlaps are sufficiently unlikely. So the example I was given before, if you only have 10 different values, at least you would like to have all of these 10 appear equally often. You often enough want to have that there's no repetition, so then if you have 100 data, you would need to have definitely more than 100 possible values, and then depends on how random your function is, you might need us to like 100 square entries, possible values, in order to avoid overlaps. If you have a hash function in crypto, you want more. So you want to avoid what we call collisions. So if you have a head of some string x, it shouldn't be the same as a string, as a hash of a string y. Well, that can't work, right? I mean, if you have infinitely many inputs and only 2 to the n outputs, we can't guarantee this. But it should be unlikely. So that means we want n reasonably large, typically at least 256. If you have 2 to the 256 possible outputs and the function is sufficiently random, you will not see the same thing twice in however much time you have for your computation. But for instance, we could compute the residue mod 2 to the 256. That would work, right? We look at the first thing as an integer, some encoding of strings into integers. Then we take the rest by computing mod 2 to the 256, and then we have a number. Means we just look at the first 256 position. that would be a function where it's unlikely that we see the same thing twice. But it's very easy to come up with two numbers where we see the same result. So for crypto, we also want to make it such that somebody would have a really hard time finding x and y with this. So what we want more. So we want even that it is hard any such x and y. So of course they exist. Because the size of, well, any strings of arbitrary length is a lot larger than the strings of length n. Now, to be more precise, the properties we want, this thing is called conditional resistance, and there are more properties we want. We also want to make it hard to go back to any other value, any pre-value. So, a cryptographic hash function should satisfy so first property is called preimage resistance. If I give you some output, z, which is in the range that h would map to, so it's in the range of the hash function on all inputs, it is hard to compute any x with the hash value of x being z. So finding a preimage of z should be hard. I promise you there is one, z is in the right range, but you shouldn't have a chance of getting it. So that totally rules out the computing mod some number. If my hash function does mod 1000, and I would like to have anything that maps to 3, well, 3 is a good example. 3 mod 1000 is still 3, so this will be done. So I need a much more complicated function there in order to make it hard to go back. We haven't seen any examples of functions where it's really hard to go backwards. Like if you have an LFSR in there, we can run the LFSR backwards. So this is not a good example. All of these designs are much more complicated. On the other hand, they have a somewhat easier job than what we've done so far. So far we wanted encryption. You put in a plaintext, get a ciphertext, and the other party has to be able to get the ciphertext back. Has to be invertible. For hash functions, we just want the opposite. We don't want it to be invertible. There shouldn't be any way to invert it. So that also means that this z here is a good fingerprint. So the relation between what we just talked about PGP and the hash function is the PGP fingerprints you see is using a hash function on the public keys. So it's computing the hash of my 1000 or 4000 bits of my public key and using this as a short form of the key. Now there's more. We want to have something closely related but still slightly different, which is called second preimage resistance. name implies, it should be hard to find a second preimage. So I give you an X, and you should have a hard time finding a Y with the same output. So given X and H of X, it is hard to compute a Y, well, it has to be not given to X, with the hash of X, the hash of Y, being the hash of X. And it's not that if you can solve the preimage resistance, like if you can compute preimages, doesn't mean you can compute second preimages. Maybe your attack is exactly such that for any output value, you can go back to exactly one preimage. If you have a very, very strange hash function or you have a very powerful attack, you still would get a deterministic preimage. And if this is now exactly the X I'm feeding you, then you can solve preimage, but you can't solve second preimage. If you can solve second preimage, you still wouldn't figure out exactly what it was. But like, these are closely related. From all the attacks we know, like, we don't know anything better for those, for one than the other. We always get like random outputs. Like, all the attacks we have on, say, second preimage or preimage don't take any benefits of the difference. But structurally, there's a difference. I mean, this is not the same definition. And finally, we want collision resistance. Now we're not given anything. We have the full freedom to pick any X and Y we want. And it should still be complicated to find any X and Y which have the same image. So it is hard to find any X not equal to Y which have the same result. So with H of X equals H of Y. Now that problem is easier. If you're trying to like take this for a random function, so somebody gives you a hash function, tells you, okay, it's 256 of output, then for preimages, if you're searching, you're picking random strings, trying again, then normally it takes you 2 to the n, so 2 to the 256 in our example, till you find a valid string. So this one here, if you have a brute force, then takes 2 to the n. On average. I mean, it's a randomized function, you might get lucky sooner, and there's no guarantee that after 2 to the n you'll have the right value. You just try it in various inputs until you get lucky. The same thing is for the second preimages. If there's nothing strange about a hash function, the best we can do is just try random y's. Okay, we're leaving out x because else it wouldn't hold. So we're just picking another y, another y, another y, and hope to hit the same value. So also here, you're getting the same 2 to the n. Collision resistance. Now this is something which, if doing like statistics and you're trying to motivate a class to pay attention, that you can actually learn something here. Is you're asked about like, what is everybody's birthday? Now you're not going to do this because privacy, but you must have heard about the birthday paradox. Now there are 365 different birthdays. So in a group like this, Of course, we don't have anybody who has the same birthday. Don't do this in a group with twins. Normally, people are surprised that if you have a group of 30, it's fairly likely you have a collision. You have 50% chance of having collision, even though it's far, far fewer than the number of days there are in a year. That is because we're not fixing one target and trying to find a second one, but we're just taking repeated draws out of the selection, and any collision works. So the Bernstein paradoxon says that if we try square root of the number of possibilities, so instead of 2 to the n, we only need 2 to the n and then over 2 in the exponent, many tries, we will have found a collision. So the Bernstein paradox says that brute force in 2 to the n over 2. So that's a problem if you only have, say, 32 output strings. Then it will take 2 to the 16 computation, which is very, very easy to find some collision. So collision is really easy, but even 2 to the 32 computation is not very much. So if you need to find a second preimage, so if you're going by a 32-bit PGP fingerprint, it is not so hard to come up with another number which has the same 32. Now, the long fingerprint is a lot larger, so then it becomes more complicated. And so go by the long fingerprint or go by the home pages if you want to get the keys. For hash functions, the important things to remember is what we want from the hash function is these properties. Good news is we have a few, bad news is we had a few which weren't quite as good. So the history of crypto, we have seen a whole bunch of such constructions which didn't quite live up to, say, collision resistance. That's usually the first to fall, and there are also some where we even can't compute preimages. That's it for today. See you again Monday.